I always look for that just perfect calming lull that happens naturally in conversation when everyone's kind of caught up with the neighbor next to them, people are coming in the room, and just ready now to sink into the hour together. So, my name is Christian Dupont, and I'm the Burns Librarian here at Boston College. Welcome to Burns Library. I know that many of you actually haven't been in this room before, the Francis Thompson room, so what an appropriate place for poetry, and we're actually surrounded, well, we've got Patmore here, and then we have the Maynills here, Alice, another poet, okay, if you think about it, Wilford as well, and we're surrounded by epic poetry here, and so the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Romance epics, and some of you would know, like Mary, that Dante is a particular favorite, and so coming down the middle here. So we're surrounded by poetry this evening, and we're glad that we have 5 of, well, many poets here. Some of you are poets, and maybe up here another year. We might make this a tradition, I don't know. Depends how well we do tonight. It's going to be a lot dependent on Sofer over here. I mean, how he does Anyway, but again, welcome really on behalf of the libraries. We, because even the room is inscribed in its architecture, but in our collection. So in addition to the people here, it's the books, the manuscripts, poets of many ages and cultures, frankly, in our collection, and we're continuing to add to that. So that's where it's been nice. And I think where's Suzanne Matson there, right? We have the creative writing senior concentrated readers, right?
Yeah, senior showcase for the creative writing.
Senior showcase for the creative writing concentrators. Since we've done that for what, 3? This is our 4th year now, I think, during Arts Fest. Okay. And so that's where, bringing writers and writerly events into our spaces is something we did. And then, it was Maxim Shrayer said, we've done other events here in Burns Library around a particular book. We said, why don't we just do a general reading? So that's kind of where the genesis for this evening came from. And, I'll step aside here in a moment. Especially since it's warm, I think everyone's over here giving this the sign of time. I'm sorry, this means that spring is finally here, right? We're warming up, okay? But oddly, what hasn't happened with our building, this is an older century-old building, is they're in the middle of replacing some of our HVAC equipment. We're getting a brand new chiller, which is like really exciting for us. I think it's not going to get turned on until like tomorrow. So it might get a little warm through the evening here, okay? But just translate that into the emotions we feel for one another. I think we'll be all right. We will go downstairs afterward, but it's also going to be a little warm. I might open the windows there. I can't quite do that here. It's not terribly hot. But we'll have some cool drinks or some hot coffee if you want, and some cookies and brownies and just more conversation. And books. I think we did manage in the end to have at least 1 book for each of our readers this evening, so you can check that out. And we're thankful to the BC Bookstore for making that happen in our readers as well. Probably enough said for a general welcome, except maybe the code housekeeping question. So if anyone needs a restroom sort of during the event, I do have that middle door, actually door, looks like it's a wall, it's a door, okay? And you can go over to the elevator area, and there's a restroom there. Otherwise, down our grand staircase, all the way down 2 more levels is where the restrooms are otherwise, okay? Good for that, right? So reception after reading. The last thing I'll mention in sort of introducing her and moderating for the panel is how many people have seen me without a chalk line and standing up, especially behind a podium here, really? I've got about 3 or 4 comments on that. People know me well, Jim, I'm wearing a shirt, that's really. So I can actually own a pair of jeans, okay? But that's to say, I didn't, you want to set up the person who comes next to you, follows you, to have that moment of contrast. So with Eric Weiskott, who's always the acumen of sartorial perfection, will come up here. So Professor Eric Weiskott, that's it, I mean that, Eric. I mean, really, we're doing, I say that because you're bringing your students in for class on Wednesday. We're doing Chaucer, so poetry continues. Not to say, many of you from English department, but some of you may be faculty members who, we don't know as yet, but we bring students in with you, to work with our books and manuscripts, and we do that, like 60 times a semester. So, if you haven't thought about that and would like to add that dimension to your classes, please do. All right, so Professor Weiskott is going to take us now into our panel, and I'm going to enjoy being part of the audience with you. Okay, so thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to be introducing tonight's featured faculty poets. The order will be alphabetical, and I'll introduce each speaker before they speak so that the details of their many accomplishments will be fresh in your mind as they begin their reading. So first we have Professor Allison Adair. She is the author of Clearing, winner of Milkweed's Max Ritvo Poetry Prize and a New York Times New and Noteworthy book. I teach The Clearing often in creative writing workshops. It's a wonderful book. Her work appears in Best American Poetry, Threepenny, Georgia Review, and elsewhere, and has received the Pushcart Prize, Florida Review Editors Award, and the Orlando Prize. Please join me in welcoming Allison Adair.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to Maxim and Christian for organizing and to Eric for moderating. It's always a pleasure to read with colleagues and fellow poets. I remember when I was interviewing, I asked Suzanne Matson, who was the chair, I said something about where I was teaching at the time and how creative writing, composition, and literary scholarship were in different buildings. She said, we're not like that here, which I really appreciate. We're not like that here. So it's so fun to read with colleagues. I'm actually only going to read 2 poems. But I'm lucky I'm first, Allison Adair, because the second one is very long. The first one is one I wanted to read for a few reasons, and then I asked my wonderful thesis student, Shrayer, which one I should read, and she said the same one, so I'm glad. I've been very interested in the relationship between imagination and memory, and how often we are in the material world, but our minds are living somewhere else. So both poems kind of pick up that question. Come on in, there's seats in the front. And I do want to say to the students in the room that this poem was rejected probably between 20 and 30 times. And most of the time that would be the question. The poem would return to it to revise, but not this one. And of all the poems I've written, it's the most, I've had the most people write to me about it and say, this is the poem I needed at the time. So sometimes it's just a question, I guess, of matchmaking the right poem to the right place. If imagination and memory met unexpectedly one last time, it would be this moment, the dark, slow mess of one body unpiling toward another in sleep, the longing of 2 waves reeling in queasy parallel. Mostly, it's like you never rested here, this body, your head never heavy as sorrow, as troubled bone, never turned in my palms like an artifact, gently undisguised. I shouldn't remember you as the trim boat you never were, this place as a storm. There are errands now, children. On the 2nd floor of the world, a tepid bath fills. Some people will bear any anchor through the endless fleeing tide. Our ocean unraveled quickly into salt, but listen for a second, as we used to. Do you hear it holding us there, scraping against the old undertow? Minerals under motion, rock inside swell. No. Shell, just shell, dry littering the wreck line. And the second poem I'm going to read was just written on Saturday. And I owe it to Sue Roberts and Kim Garcia and our friend Deb Bennett, who teaches at Berkeley, also a wonderful poet who's not here. Because we went to South Dennis over the weekend, thanks to Deb. And we were there for a hot minute, like we were just there and back, but we went to the lake for like 20 minutes and I was like, I must return and write a poem. And for various reasons, some of you know I haven't written much over the last year, but this one kind of just came out and it's over 4 pages. And I would just say for those of you who have studied poems with me, there's 2 poems I would cite for this that if you're looking for inspiration, this one unintentionally borrows from, which are Monica Yoon's Detail of the Rice Chest, where she got advice from C.D. Wright to go back to an image from a detail, rather, from a poem she'd previously written that still haunted her for some reason. And so that's unintentionally how this began. There's a poem I have called rural, it's RDA Box 16A, which is our rural route address before, if you don't have an actual street name in Gettysburg. And there's a reference to two cousins, young boys who got into, I guess what you could call a hunting accident. So that's what this picks up. The other poem is Paige Lewis's "You Can Take Off Your Sweater, I've Made to You." This is called Rifle. What I know is they've been hunting. What I know is it happened right after. No one knew they were home. If they had bagged anything that morning, it wasn't hung, though I do know the family had a gambrel, just a beam and 2 posts, but the ground was hard. They lived far from town. I remember their rusted blue truck. They were still in their camo, hadn't yet removed a boot. Cold clung to their laces. It was a basement, that's what I remember. My basement is all I can picture. It was a basement. I know this or have imagined it deeply enough to have built a room, named that room Memory. When I imagine blood, I see it spreading across my own basement's white tile. Blood is almost beside the point. I don't know if we ever talked about it. But they were cousins, our cousins. What I know is they were kin, but friends-like, more friends. It was a small town. I didn't know the numbers then, but now I can tell you 5,000 year-round. I knew his sister through my sister, through school. She was older. I knew her, Tammy. She wore blue eyeliner. I remember her oilwood hair. Everybody knew she lightened it lemon till it turned orange, just on the ends. The end is the only thing we know. They were cousins. Tammy said best friends. I know Tammy said that because I remember my sister telling me. And I remember the exact pattern of carving along the wood paneled walls. Thin line, and curve like a violin's neck. Thin, thick, flat panel, then the same, just in reverse. My sister's hair fell straight down in long lines. Her brush then had a carved wood handle. Tammy's brother laughed. This is what I remember. 14, 15, both of them laughing, breathing hard. Could have been either one. Both rifles still loaded. In the basement, we roller skated for hours, in circles. Sometimes we would switch directions. I remember the sudden awareness of each hip's muscles, how they'd been straining beyond my perception. Only changing directions let me know they hurt. I couldn't tell they were hurting. I know there were details the newspaper left out. I know or knew one of the troopers' kids. Thick folders on the table compressed to a seed. 3 rows of text all soaked in gasoline. I remember the cop's daughter. She knew where to find the sweetest corn beyond the yard, right at peak, timed it, pulled back the chicken wire for us just as the green combine sputtered into use, just as it came to helix the field, to oblivion all the angles of all the paths we tramped down. Somehow the combine's metal teeth split corn from stalk, its threshing unseen, inexplicable. What I know is it was a tragedy at first. Everybody agreed. Tammy's brother was smiling, even if soon his hair became long and greasy. Never an issue before it happened, but suddenly it was long, greasy, unclean. The cousin smiled up from the paper, at least that's what I remember. When he died, everyone shook their heads, maybe because they knew this kind of tragedy can happen elsewhere. It was hunting season, after all. The rifles were leaning there along every wall, just past our small tables steaming with soup. I remember Tammy tried to get away with shortening her uniform skirt by rolling it at the waistband instead. The nuns had given up on her by then, or were more worried about the distant sounds from the basement. I know it was deer season because what else was that hungry for our rutting apples? Trees heavy, low in the yard. In the winter, the deer would, wait, don't go. I know, you're right. I know, I don't want them to go through with it. It's all I can do now, delay. It was November, open season. You want to know. I know you want to know too, much as I do, how it happened, You need to know the angle of the shot, who was smiling, who wasn't, what the parents wore, what kind of spoon, if it coated the spoon. I am to blame. I have created this hole in you, this need. You need to know what the deer thought. You want to hold the boys safe in your throat, want to blunt the bullets let tip under your tongue, to warm the small punctured organs in your palm. You have to know, to assess. That's what we agreed to. Ruin. It's what we're doing here. Otherwise, I know it is sunny outside. You see clarity, cause. If it's infection from a swim or cigarettes or a foggier rot that hardens the heart. Which of us knew how many bullets a chamber can hold? Who of us counted each shot, collected spent shells, spent time to verify? Even now, I sort the wax cylinders by color and seal. I don't want it to happen again or then. I don't want to know either way, to go down again into the basement. He raised the butt to his shoulder and took aim with a smile, one of two smiles. Either it was sunny out and this his kin. They were laughing. The day flowed before them like a river suddenly loosed from someone's chest. And if this, he spent four decades in the small room he's built of memory. Their small cots, their hands, the shot's timing, their tiny crack. Or it was sunny out, this boy, his kin. He took aim, imagined, then built us this small dark room. Thank you.
That was incredible. Thank you for sharing such deep work with us. Our next reader is Mary Elliot. She is an MFA candidate in creative writing at Boston University and assistant director of the Lonergan Institute at BC. Her poetry has been published in Trampoline, Ekstasis, Macrina Magazine, and Pensive, a global journal of spirituality and the arts. She is presently finishing a collection of poetry. Please join me in welcoming Mary Elliot.
Everyone, I feel so honored to get to read with these amazing faculty poets tonight. All of my poems are very new, so none of these have been published yet, and I'm going to read a few different ones. I write free verse and formal, and only one of them is going to be formal. I'll get started. Invitation. Tonight, let's undress the table. I want its sanguine skirt to be undone. I can picture the glass vase and grandiflora roses falling to the floor. I'll start the argument if you pick the subject. Chestnuts, graphite, vellum drawings, a copper river, thirst. And to repair this place will require lifting shadows, petals, and ghost shards visible only when caught by the light. The next one is the first, it's the formal poem, and it's the first in a series of Dante poems, which I have to read because Christian organized this event. And because, yes, and he's looking over my shoulder, it would be. So I have, this has really been an exercise in close reading for me and translation. And each of the poems takes one tercet from one of the cantos. I translate that tercet and then do a sort of if you are a student, you might have heard your teachers talk about ekphrastic poetry, where you write a poem responding to a piece of art. So I do that with Dante's text, just because I feel like there's so much in every tercet. So this is from Canto 1. This is the first in the series, and the title of my poem is Prelude, Maundy Thursday. And the only thing you need to know about it in terms of Dante's poem is that Dante, the Divine Comedy, opens after Maundy Thursday. So that's the context. This is the translation of the tercet. Then there was the fear, quieting down now, having in the lake of my heart endured the night, the one passed in pity and remorse. Dante Canto 1, 19 through 21. On a night of wine and thorns, I am lying awake. The moon is in fragments. Light strikes across my face. Dogwood blooms lay on their sides. Dark figures seem to think white vinegar from a sponge is a usual thing to drink. Copper and tin, the vigil's bell, is ringing in my mouth. The sky is black and red. Summer tanagers head south. Remember dinner, the garden, our walks along the road? I cannot find your eyes. Silver coins hang around your throat. I'm gonna lift the mood a little and I'm gonna read a fun poem. This is just a very fun poem, and it's called Boneyard. Let us drink cheap white wine on a Sunday afternoon, because I love you to the moon, scratch that. How about, I like you more than I like the toes of a rainbow, more than a rainbow likes the tempo of a cloud, more than a cloud likes watching its shadow move along Montgomery Boulevard. You are a song. Baby, I'm a hound dog, just doing my best to match your pitch. I know you like the Delta blues know a good boneyard, know its highs and know its lows. I'm in deep, more than lemons and sweet tea. It's your thighs. It's the way you sleep like a bulldozer. It's the way you cross your legs, read the wind over. I dream about you like a rat dreams about New York City. You are my primal scream, my buttercream. As sure as eggs is eggs, honey, I am to you as a mole is to its burrow, as matter was, for the first time, to light. And then I'm just gonna read two more, and this one is called Dishwasher Glass. There's the sound of the steel door softly open, of coated wire racks and wheels moving through grooves in the floor, and the silence of the sump of collective water, stillness and one drop. There is the clink of the wedding band against the thin rim of a crystal glass. There is the cup set down on the Calicut marble counter, a trimmer from its base moving up along the lip. There's the bone bowl belonging to the china cabinet, the wooden spoon to the cedar hutch, the ceramic pitcher painted in yellow. There is light coming through windows, enfolding the baby spoon and the knives. And then there is the shatter, and me, watching each piece glisten. And the last one I'm reading is very new, and I wrote it on Holy Week, and I wanted to read this one because I was thinking about, if those of you who watch the news, some of Pope Leo's remarks and response. And so I was thinking about him and about what it means for us to forgive one another, and also to, forgive God sometimes when we feel things are hard. So this one is called Forgiveness. I know the shape of the back of your neck and the glint of your shadow across a terracotta floor. I know your cuticles and your favorite blue and the lean in your walk. And I have seen you plumb out of luck and sick and full of hunger. There are days I have made things worse, made you feel empty or ridiculous. I consider all this under the clamor of incense on Good Friday, where water in a copper basin is the only thing singing. I watch a man lower himself completely to the earth, forehead to stone. I am always thinking of you and of how we work to raise ourselves out of thirst. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Next we'll be welcoming Suzanne Matson to the stage. Suzanne was the chair of the English department when I was hired, and I remember thinking, to reprise Allison's comment about different buildings, I was trained in a graduate program where their creative writing and criticism were in the same building, but they might as well not have been. There was an invisible wall, and I just thought, an English department that would choose for a poet to be its chair is an English department that I wanted to be part of, and I was right, and I'm so pleased to be part of it. So Suzanne Matson is the author of 2 volumes of poetry from Alice James' books, Sea Level and Durable Goods, and 4 novels, most recently Ultraviolet. She has a new poetry collection as Creatures, and a book of nonfiction, Winnowing, forthcoming this fall. Her poems have appeared widely in journals. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne Matson.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Maxine and Christian, for organizing. Thank you all for being here. It's really joyful to be reading among colleagues, as Allison said. I'm going to read 2 poems too, and like Allison. And one is longish in parts on 4 tracks. The tracks have to do with aging and being mortal. And then the 4th track is about a very young being. I'll just pause slightly between the parts. It's called Bone Songs. The scanner is silent and quick. Spine, hip, forearm. The bones keeping me vertical are holding up, plumb line to the sky, though the forearm and wrist dwindle. Now I feel the weight of everything, the frying pan, stack of books, geriatric dog who must be lifted by his 2-handled harness to eat and drink and pee and poop. I have long feet, but tiny wrists, as if my bones come from 2 different people, a chimera. All our bones are honeycombed inside, both living tissue and inorganic mineral. My new task is to incorporate more mineral, be mineral, but alive, and also to bear weight. Not enough to break me, but almost. The old dog, Oscar, is nothing but bones. His eyes track me around the room. When he needs to go out, he fidgets, so I will know. I give him a yellow capsule that dulls, I hope, the ache of bone on bone. 2 months ago, he walked. 3 months before that, he trotted. I scroll back to remember when he leaped without gravity over the backs of other dogs, which they hated. I can't pinpoint the day it shifted between Oscar walking and Oscar being held up, his legs moving from memory beneath the harness. I can only look back and be surprised. Here he walked, here he didn't. His legs treading without weight, like a diver striding in slow motion across the seafloor. Same with my mother, the not walking. First it was the backwards hoist, my knees bent for a purchase, her arms around my shoulders, the 2 of us dance partners as I lifted her up from the armchair, then rolled the walker to her. Then it became the wheelchair to go outside on our small excursions, then the wheelchair to roll to the dining room, then the wheelchair. By the end, my mother had shrunk 4 inches, even when she raised herself as best she could from her dowager's slump, her head seemingly too heavy to carry. Throughout the day, I remind myself to straighten, but often catch a reflection of myself leaning forward into something, a laptop screen, the mile ahead, whatever lies just out of sight. Oscar's bones were trying to make their way into the world through a bed sore opening wide like a mouth. We knew it was coming, the skin so thin on the pointy parts, no matter how many times we turned him. Even though we were waiting, we gasped when it appeared, fleshy lips opening to speak. We were gathered round. The young dog hung her head over the edge of the couch and watched. She forgot to ask for breakfast. She forgot to ask for balls. Grown sons watched from a screen. One kept pleading to call it off, let nature decide. But nature would have swallowed Oscar years ago, would have already bleached his long bones white. All Oscar had left during the last weeks were his eyes, tracking us. We moved him from room to room so the eyes could be with us. On the last day they followed and watched. He wouldn't be the one to leave first. The vet said this first drug is going to make him feel wonderful. I hoped he felt his body's weight dissolve into flight. When my mother had a half glass of wine, she'd tell us she was flying. We liked that little joke. When she'd stop being mad, lay down her weapons, we could relax. Toward the end, they gave her a drug to free her from bitterness. Then she would turn her head when she missed parts of the general talk, smiling at what she guessed was the punchline. It was a terrible thing to have Oscar lock eyes with us while the vet released the final drug into the vein of his hind leg. Once as a puppy, he got very sick, and I dripped water by syringe into his mouth, willing him back. He held my eyes and lapped the drops. It was the same with 2 later illnesses. He always pulled himself back along the tightrope of our gaze. 3 boys grew up with their individual griefs. Who doesn't? They each lay with their dog face to face. Oscar never broke eye contact. That is how he held them up. The killing drug made its way quickly from vein to heart. His eyes, liquid and deep and neutral and patient and stoic, solidified into black, into gone. When he was gone, we weren't. The young dog, Inky, wasn't. No one else was gone. I took her to the running field the next morning before others had come. She makes it her work, her life, to catch balls. I threw as many as she wanted, and she leaped straight up, over and over, 1/2 of a pair of parentheses hanging in the air. Let me tell you about this dog. Her body is a beautiful machine. Everything new, shiny eyes, shiny teeth. I'm sure her organs are glossy and pink. Her skeleton, full basket of ribs, long leg bones, stretches airborne, padded in elastic muscle, alchemy of fibrous twitch, oxygen, energy, mysterious spirit. I take a drug that might build my bone back, though there is a small chance it might break my bones instead. This, I guess, is how medicine works. A balance of cure versus harm. I must stay upright for a certain time after swallowing it. Instructions I follow exactly. When Inky and I are in the field, I do not bend to get her ball. I sink deep from the knees, curtsying to earth. And the last poem I will read is also in parts, though not as many, not as long. It's part of a diptych about my sons. The one I'm going to read is called The One in Phillipsburg, Montana, and the one that it is paired with is the one in Garibaldi, Oregon. The one in Oregon is referenced in this poem. The only other thing you need to know is the Montana poet Richard Hugo wrote a poem, a really lovely poem that I've taught over and over again, Degrees of Gray in Phillipsburg. This is the same Phillipsburg, although, it wasn't meant to be after Richard Hugo, but once I wrote a poem with Phillipsburg in the title, I felt I'm gonna have to somehow nod to Richard Hugo, but it's not after him, and it's not about what his was about. And I consulted my brilliant friend and colleague, Allison Adair, and got some ideas from her. And anyway, Hugo's mentioned in the poem. The one in Phillipsburg, Montana. After his brother goes west to Oregon, taking his half of their jokes and running routines, my youngest son is left with the apartment looking out over the Pintlers, the moraines of grassland that stretch below, zippered with gravel roads against the lavender mountains cut out against the sky. It's the kind of address the post office won't recognize when I want to mail things, a place where cell service cuts out, where in winter you'd better have four-wheel drive to get back up the hill to the slab of cement your rental rests on. But they already wrecked the pickup one night on the snowy interstate coming back from Missoula. An older couple from the church gave them a van their daughter used to get back and forth to school before she crashed it, though it will still drive if you don't mind the burning smell. In this balance of sky and peaks and hollow in warm, forgiving June, I visit while the youngest son considers his future. The friendly neighbors with the baby and the husky pup have moved away to build a house. The brother has moved to his new job in Oregon. The old miner who comments on the ladies and wants to throttle millionaires keeps watch from his bar stool on East Broadway and, like Hugo's prisoner, isn't going anywhere ever. If you don't want to chance the van's smoldering brakes, you can walk to town, easier going down than coming back, of course. The deer roam the side streets, grazing the yards and vacant lots, and the dogs lie on the sidewalk waiting for their owners to come back. The brothers have worked the ski resort, the dude ranch, the dive bar, and finally, the bee yards. The youngest son will miss that most, even scraping hives in the freezing shed. He didn't mind the bees crawling on his sleeves and veil. It made him happy to feed them, lift out the frames to make sure all was well. He didn't mind his stings, even the one that made his slip as big as a plum, or the rages of the manager whose wife drove off and left the kids and hasn't been heard from since. The manager drank Jack Daniels from his thermos, shot AK-47s after work to let off steam. If you want to know empty, live here in Phillipsburg, though it's a holy kind of empty, cold that will kill you if you sit in your truck too long on a winter midnight waiting for the tow. In town, people keep warm in bars. At closing, the roads are empty enough to skid across, and sometimes you don't hurt anyone. The tow is coming. Meanwhile, beyond the white road and the white fields, the mountains glow white against the black and starry sky, and the animals dig in deep to live, knowing how. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Next we have Maxim D. Shrayer, who I think it's not out of place to say is the presiding genius behind this gathering, which I do hope we can continue in future years. Professor Shrayer teaches Russian, English, and Jewish studies and is a bilingual author and scholar. His books of poetry include the Russian language Voina, the English language Zion Square, and the bilingual Parallel Letters, and those are just the ones published last year. Please join me in welcoming Maxim Shrayer.
Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate it. And I also want to thank Christian and his colleague Constance here at the Burns for welcoming us. And I do hope it becomes an annual, well, it can be biannual. tradition. And I also want to pour myself some water and say that it's such a pleasure to read alongside Allison and Mary and Suzanne and Eric, of course. I feel like Eric is reading with us. Eric mentioned the 3 books for which I will read. Thank you for that. And the first one is this book, Parallel Letters, Parallelные письмо, which is in 2 languages, but it's not a bilingual book. Even though poems are in Russian on one side and English on the other, it is a book from a project that I've been working with, which I call Parallel Letters. Essentially, I write a text, sometimes first in Russian, sometimes second in Russian, first in English, and then I write a parallel version, but it's not an auto translation. So if you were to compare them, they do not read as translations. The first poem I will read is called Wailing Wall, and the backdrop is quite simple. So about 10 years ago, I took our younger daughter, Tatiana, by the way, both my mom, Mila, and my wife, Karen, are here, and I say this for 2 reasons. First, they are my closest family here, but also they are my principal readers in Russian and in English, respectively. So Tatiana, who's now 18, was 10. We went to Israel. It was the first time, and I brought her to the Wailing Wall. The Wailing Wall is what remains of Solomon's Temple, the one that was destroyed in the year 70 of our Common Era. And kind of how you get there is you enter Old City of Jerusalem through one of the gates, let's say Jaffa Gate, and you kind of wind your way through the 4 quarters, the Armenian, the Christian, the Arab, and the Jewish, and then you go through a lot of security, and you see the actual wall, and beyond it you see the Dome of the Rock. It's quite a sight. And normally, when you get there are a lot of pilgrims, men and boys tend to go to the left, and women and girls to the right, and that's what the poem is about. Wailing Wall. In a black angle-length skirt, purchased in Mea Shearim in a girl's clothing basement, a white band on her brow, a white cloud on the blue sky draped over Jerusalem, my younger daughter, Tatiana, Rebecca, accompanied me to the hotel. When we reached the boundary where men and boys turn to the north and women and girls to the south, I'm scared to go alone, my daughter said, and I led her, a girl, a boy, a butterfly, where the pilgrims flowed. We forded the crowd, found a crevice between the time-molten stones, and inserted our notes into languages. And the original intent was for me to include the note, but then when I composed the parallel version in Russian, I concluded that, of course, when you write notes to God, the language is immaterial, so I just have dots on the page. And I'll read the Russian. Котель. В черной споднице, купленной в районе Меа Шеарим в подвале готового платья, с белой повязкой на лбу, с белым облаком на голубом покрывале, окутавшим Иерусалим, моя младшая дочь сопровождала меня к стене плача. Когда мы достигли предела, где мужчины и мальчики идут на север, а женщины и девочки на юг, я одна боюсь, сказала дочь. И я повел ее за собой, девочку, мальчика, мотылька, текла река пилигримов. Мы прошли страной, выбрали расщелину в желтых камнях неопалимых и вместе положили записку. Now, the next poem I'll read, which generally what I've been writing about is the predicament of living at the time of wars, primarily wars in places with which I have a very, very intimate connection. Ukraine, 3 of my late 4 grandparents were born and grew up in Ukraine, and Israel. And the paradox of writing in Russian when so much has been severed, including my former Soviet and Russian past. So this poem is called L'éducation sentimentale. It references Flaubert's novel, but really it's about growing up in the Soviet Union and how it scars you. Soviet women past their prime, in aubergine turtlenecks washed to a sheen, Vera Josephovna Perlbaum, Lyubov Leonidovna Bernstein, public detractors of Stalin, secret admirers of Pasternak, keepers of old cooking styles, cloves and garlic, celery and parsnips. Dear children, you must love the classics. They preached in voices laced with pain as our masters shot down a South Korean liner west of Sakhalin in the Sea of Japan. The English teacher, she's no dummy, spoke one classmate. Jews are usually smart. I stared out the window. Fucking Russian teacher, spoke another classmate. The sniveling Jew bitch. I smashed the window. All the world's a stage and we are merely players. Repeated Vera Vilyamovna Perlstein. Children, drop by drop, squeeze out the slave. Repeated Lyubov Antonovna Birnbaum. Outside the window, the warm-hearted playboy Brezhnev was dying. After him, the bloodthirsty spymaster Andropov was dying. After him, the timid party secretary Chernenko was dying. Then Gorbachev fought for his spot under the sun of the dying. We read Lady with Lapdog. We memorized Shakespeare's sonnets. We learned to love and betray one another. A whole lifetime wouldn't be enough to shape the memories of this rancorous theater. And the next poem I wrote just a few days after Russia invaded Ukraine. It's about Thomas Mann. And why about Thomas Mann? As you know, Thomas Mann was the center of this unique community of German-speaking expatriates from Germany, Austria, and the Czech lands who were living in Los Angeles, many in Pacific Palisades. And then after the war, he was under a lot of pressure from the United States not to do anything with what became his Germany. This all culminated in 1949 during Goethe's bicentennial because Thomas Mann wanted to visit not only what had become West Germany, but also Weimar, which is in East Germany, and also Lübeck, his hometown. And so I started thinking about that, and one thing led to another. It's called Last Will and Testament. Thomas Mann has returned to the city of Lübeck. The municipal elders have gathered to welcome him home. He's old. He blushes, he feels like a young German lover, and he doesn't know how to abolish his shame. Katya Mann tells her husband, we don't belong in this country. How eerie this place, how sated with murderous joy. All is lost at the Kirche. The bride has been wailing since sunrise. Buxtehude's great organ has been vandalized and destroyed. Darling, says Thomas Mann, on the strand of my youth, Ravemunde, sand is weightless like ashes and cold like unearthly embrace. All my life, I've been faithful to Germany. Now, what an ending to discover that nothing of mine remains. So that's that. And and now imagine how he felt. This is just a reconstruction. And now a lyrical poem, which is for my wife Karen. And this was written during the first COVID spring summer when we escaped and we sheltered in place in our little dacha on the Cape. Those were some of the happiest months of my life, actually. And this is a poem from that life, A Midsummer Night's Dream. At slumber time, I usually wander across the internet, the everlasting poison. When I come up to the bedroom, you are asleep, and on my pillow, to the right of your head, guarding your peace, lies our miniature poodle, Stella. Before hiding myself in your solace, I move her over with my arm and shoulder. At first, our poodle barely stirs, only her fine long curls sparkle in the dark, her phosphorescent head showing black and silver. Then she jumps off and drinks for a long time from a glistening enamel vessel, and falling into the binding of dreams, I hear sounds of simple-hearted mysticism. At dawn, when all the eastern phoebes are done fainting and the doves done mourning, when in the double harness of the nebulae a chariot rides over the morning horizon, at the boundary of darkness and daybreak, the intersection of life and deathlessness. I really don't want you to awaken. Don't go yet. When else we'll be together? And I feel like I've run out of time. So a small surprise, which is that this book, Vaina, which means war, which came out in Tel Aviv a year ago, war because in a sense it's about war, but also it takes inspiration from the novel and verse by the great Yiddish poet Peretz Markish called Milchoma, which is war in Hebrew and Yiddish, which is about the war in the Shoah. But there's a middle part which is not about the war or even not by me. These are Russian translations of 6 American poets that I've gotten to know, I've learned from, I have been a neighbor of, and one of them is Andrew Sofer. And I'm going to read a Russian translation, this is with his permission, so I'm not putting him on the spot, of a poem that he will read in English. And in English it's called Poem Unpacking, and in Russian it's called Дома раскрывая вещи. Две крышки от плетеных корзин, купленных в старом городе. Луковицы, орхидей, корица, мускатный орех и молоко, стихи о Михае, какие-то скомканные карты, клич Муэдзина, летящий жасминный дождь, безобразные старухи, торгующие пряностями на Махане Якуда, мой турецкий ковер-самолет, который так и не взлетел, последний леопард Эйнгети, неуловимый, словно водопад, взрыв джаза, рикошетом от стены цитадели, вонь мочи и уличных кавардак вокруг Тель-Авивской автобусной станции, персиковые кальяны, дымящийся мятный чай, гашиш, отблеск ножа, грохот оконной жести, пляжные крысы, Яфо, танки, которые проехали по ногам моих друзей, синайские чесоточные клещи, бурящие скважины в паху, на подошвах мозоли от упавших под ноги звезд пустыни. Thank you.
Okay, what a wonderful introduction of our last poet, Andrew Sofer. His poems have appeared in Poetry International, Southwest Review, North American Review, Southern Poetry Review, and elsewhere. Andrew has written 2 books about theater, The Stage Life of Props, and Dark Matter, as well as Wave, a collection of poetry, and he teaches in the English department. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Sofer.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Maxim, for that extraordinary translation. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. I'll read for about 10 minutes. So I'll begin with the poem that Maxim just read incomparably in Russian. So this poem it's an old poem, and it's about what it's like when you're between 2 places and you're trying to leave one place when you haven't arrived at the next place yet. Home unpacking. 2 woven basket lids from the old city. Orchid bulb, cinnamon, nutmeg, and amethyst poems, some crumpled maps, Muezzin's call to the jasmine of rain, crones at Macrina Magazine spice market, my Turkish carpet that never flew, Engedi leopards elusive as waterfalls, jazz ricochets off the citadel wall, piss stench and street strut of Tel Aviv bus station, peach-scented hookahs, mint tea and hashish, knife flash and shutter slam, beach rats of Jaffa, tanks that rolled over the feet of my friends, scabies of Sinai boring tracks in my groin, foot soles blistered by shooting desert stars. And I'm going to read a brand new poem, which is about a journey that I took last month to the holy city of Varanasi in northern India on the Ganges River. It's considered the holiest city in India, and Hindus believe that if one dies in the city, one automatically gets salvation, and bathing in the waters of the Ganges purifies you, and it is many people's dying wish to be incinerated on the ghats and have one's body float down the Ganges where the pilgrims are bathing. Just a couple of words in Hindi. A tilak is that spot of colored powder or paste on the forehead, worn as a religious symbol. A sadhu is a religious ascetic or a holy person who's renounced worldly life. Puja is a blessing ritual or a worship ritual. The ghat is the broad flight of steps leading down to the bank of the river. And Hanuman is a Hindu deity with the body of a man and the face of a monkey. In Varanasi, I feel the tilak burning as we walk along the Ganges under baking sun. Worshippers are gathering at the dock. The cleansing of the bodies has begun. Bathers on the ghat await their turn. A hungry goat eats by a cinder block. Last night, my fever hit 101. I feel the tilak burning as we walk. Two yogis draw a monkey god in chalk, the face I've come to know as Hanuman. My friend's eyes and a barefoot sadhu's lock along the Ganges under baking sun. My friend wants puja from the Holy One whose staff beckons the faithful with a knock. His ashen mask is made of human bone. Worshippers are gathering at the dock, ignoring trinkets that the merchants hawk. A mother bathes her skinny, bloated son. At Harishchandra Ghat, where tourists hawk, the cleansing of the body has begun. The ceremony consumes everyone. Above the steps, I cannot help but look. The sadhu tilts his forehead to the sun, and even though it's only 10 o'clock, I feel the tilak burn. So I've been writing poems in the voices of Shakespeare's characters as a way to sort of get out of my own way of looking at the world, and I tend to gravitate towards characters I don't understand. And sometimes they come to me as songs that I imagine the characters singing. So this is Autolycus' song from The Winter's Tale. Autolycus is a sort of trickster, conman, singer, playwright, a bit sinister. It's not clear what he's doing in the play, but this is a song I imagine him singing. If you know the play, then some of the references will be clearer. Autolycus' song. A sad tale's best for winter, but a ballad's best for spring. The prince who was my master stole the witchcraft from the king. You'll find me in the marketplace to go the fools among, turning sheets to rags to paper, and gossip into song. I deal in gloves and ribbons, silly cheats and merry games, too hot, when tickling palms of maids and tromadames. I'm the tear within your garment, I'm the stitches in your seams. When you have drunk the spider, my actions are your dreams. So this is another song, the song of the Fool. The Fool is a riddling, cryptic character who accompanies King Lear on various adventures and disappears halfway through the play with this very strange line, and I'll go to bed at noon. And it will probably help to know that a capon is a... Okay, it's cut out. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll speak louder. A capon is a castrated rooster, considered a delicacy in Shakespeare's day. Song of the Fool. Shadows flee at noon. The beggar's horn is dry. Dogs bark at the king, mad under Dover sky. He gave all to his daughters. They turned him out of doors. The knights who graced his household now sweep and mop the floors. Heaven's vault is empty. The wild geese have fled. Oh, for a cup and capon, The bedlam cries for bread. All right, something lighter. This poem is called Ceremony. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Ceremony. At boarding school, the girls would cut our hair. A crowd would gather around the chosen pair, boys shy and jokey in their scruffy jeans, girls shabby chic like waifs in magazines. The boy sat rigid. She would fuss and pout as if to say, I know what I'm about, then tease a clump of hair above the nape. The boy succumbed. Now there was no escape. He'd shut his eyes and blush as she leant in. The buds between them prickled every skin. But once the offering was trimmed and brushed, we'd creep away as if they'd never touched. Okay, maybe two more. So this is another new poem that I actually wrote for an event where Mary and I read last fall, which had to do with the Flourishing Together initiative that was campus wide. So we were invited to think about poetry and the art of flourishing, and this is the poem I wrote for that occasion. And it's about a bird. Heron. Standing alone beside the pond as usual, you watch the great blue heron spread its wings like the unfolding pages of a book you've dreamt of reading since you were a child. A story containing all the mystery of why a life turns out the way it does. Dog-eared, slow-going, stiffened spine, the works. But there's no point in trying to read the leaves taking flight this autumn afternoon, so you turn back to the pond. The geese are here, as always, playing their noisy water sports and chasing each other, taking a dislike for no apparent reason, then calming down. And now, a line from Rilke comes to you. The cure for loneliness is solitude. You wonder if the heron would agree. His missus is about somewhere, you've seen her, but never at the same time. Have they discovered something about how marriage ought to work? Perhaps the pond's still life can teach us that. There's always something new to ponder here. The placid trees reflecting in the pond, the snapping turtles bathing in the sun. I like to think it's their world more than ours. They beat us by 100 million years. So, they've a right to take a little snooze, maybe even see us come and go, then slip sagaciously into the water, leaving the pond exactly as it was, unruffled as a heron's outstretched wings, the half-read book beside you as you sleep. I'll end with a poem that Mary inspired me to read because it's in terza rima, which is Dante's rhyme scheme that he uses for the Divine Comedy, or a cursive rhyme scheme, A, B, A, B, C, B, C, D, C, and etc. So this is a poem about wind walking, which, as you might know, is a daredevil stunt that is done in an aerial barnstorming show where you walk out on the wing and walk back and forth on the planes in the air. And I've always been fascinated by barnstorming, and I sort of wondered, well, what would it be like to have this as your day job? So this is my imagining of that as a day job, and it's called Windwalker. Weary of barrel rolls, I inch along the wing, sway on a showman's heels. Below lies everything church, cornfield, farmhouse roof that second life can bring. There's nothing to reprove, yet little to delight. Glimpsing my act above, they marvel at the sight as if, daring at heart, they too had taken flight to serve a dying art. Loose from every tie that stakes a claim to earth, I sell a flash of sky. Thank you.
questions for our poets?
They left you speechless.
Just the curse on this.
Projects was spectacular in terms of questions that is subject to travel.
Mostly, I will say that was spectacular, and I'm so happy to have you all as friends and colleagues, and it was such a rich array that it's hard to come up with questions. But I was thinking as I was listening about particularly those of you who switched genres, and maybe starting with Suzanne, but that you started with poetry and then you wrote novels for a long time, and now, amazingly, it's going to be so much fun to celebrate. You have a nonfiction book and a book of poems coming out, and I'm wondering, the poems you just read are so powerful, and they're about things I recognize in your fiction too, around kind of aging and all sorts of things. But is there a reason you think you've returned to poetry more? I know you've been writing along the way, but does it have to do with aging?
The lyric moment is just something that beckons more than a plot line or an invention of a whole world. Although all the prose I was writing has, I think, kind of crept into the poetry. It's more narrative. The lines, feel like storytelling in a way. So there's a sense of a fusion. I don't really feel like I've left behind narrative. I've just kind of compressed it into sort of, like I said, the moment rather than an extended tale or a completely built world. Who else has switched genres? Maxim?
I switched countries first. Once you do that, genres are just a small footnote to the pages of your life. Yeah. So honestly, I don't find that there is a pattern to any of this. So I quite agree with what Suzanne said. She said the lyrical mode beckons. That's ultimately poetical. I find that the past 3 years I've been writing mostly poetry, and my explanation is that it's the wars, and somehow I think that's the mode that helps me react and reflect. And also, sometimes poems can be quickly published, whereas longer works of prose cannot. So I think I've had some luck with poems that had to do, particularly the invasion of Ukraine, that found a double audience in English and in Russian. So that's another tentative explanation, yes. Plus, just to tell you one other thing, in general, I feel like the longer I live, the more I'm drawn to the shorter poems. So I've written 200 pages of a novel, for instance, which is sitting somewhere in my desk drawer, and I'm not that drawn back to it in any case. So that's, yeah.
Thank you. So this is maybe a segue to my question for everyone, which is Elizabeth was asking about, how you might be drawn to poetry, over the course of a lifetime in a different way. But I'm thinking also about how this moment, how you each feel about what this moment is asking of poetry, and also maybe what this moment you feel like is asking of you in poetry. Anything you might want to say on that?
I'm thinking.
Well, I've always been writing out of the personal, and sometimes felt this nagging sense that I should be writing big issue-oriented poetry, which isn't temperamentally what I want to do. I'm in, as I said, sort of thinking about how it feels to live and remember things. Although I think living and remembering things is always infused with where we are, what's going on around us. So I think indirectly, the sorts, by this moment, I take it you mean all this shit. You know, it's there obliquely for me, in tones, in slight references, but it's not central for me. I start out of the life and relationship and kinship and perception, and then things have a kind of resonance around them. But I know others have more directly topic-oriented, issue-oriented takes on it.
Just an anecdote. This is apropos. I find myself thirsting for a kind of biblical mode, or I return to a mode that is a little bit more along the lines of what the poet prophets did. I can't do it quite yet, but I tell this anecdote. When we were kids growing up in the Soviet Union, we all were forced to memorize a poem by Pushkin, which was based on a section of Isaiah where a seraph appears to the prophet. And we all memorized this poem. Of course, nobody told us that it was based on Isaiah. I feel like the opposite is happening here, which is that everybody would recognize that it's based on Isaiah, but I'm not quite sure the mode itself would be captured. So I would very much like to be able to do both. That is to say, to understand the fact that this is a romantic poet written in the context of, say, the Napoleonic Wars, but also it harkens back to the prophetic. But it's hard. In other words, to write in that mode and respond to wars that are happening in front of us. So.
I meant it when I said I would like to hear your answer to this, and I will ask you later, but I don't feel like poetry has an obligation to give people a path forward, but I think that poetry is always doing the work that this time requires, and it's just that sometimes we're more sensitized to need it explicitly in our day. And to me, those two things, there are two things that have to do with that. One is honesty, and the other is engagement, like love. Engagement with and love of paradox. Like, not turning away from paradox. I feel like good poems are always doing that, and they're always doing that work. And it's times like this that we all can't hide from those things. So, at the very least, I feel like poems are a refuge for those who need things, and an engine for those who have stuff to do. They're always that way. I mean, I'm thinking of how years ago I came across the poems of Milkweed, the Hungarian poet, and it's like, because I had them in my arsenal, now I'm thinking of them all the time. You know, and so I love the idea of people developing, myself included, personal anthologies, so that, you know, I was at a meeting earlier today for someone's promotion, and someone was saying, the department needs to talk about X before the next promotion comes up. I feel like we need an anthology before the next war comes up. Like, we all need to have personal refrains of poems before the next thing arises, rather than having a crisis come. You know, I just think it's like when you're walking down the street, you have all these companions with you, and you know poems, and you have a poetic mindset. So I feel like that's always there for us. It's just more amplified right now.
You know, for me, poetry holds open a space in which we can sort of dignify the everyday, whether it's saying goodbye to a pet or having an experience that's so strange that you don't even know how to process it yet in language. And I also feel that poetry is a space of play, and that should not be devalued at a time when our attention is being commodified and our relations are being commodified. to have a space that's open for, serious play, as it were, to me seems very important to what it means to be a human being. And I think it's a place to reclaim our experience and share with each other in ways that make it clear what matters in a human life.
I'll add one thing I was thinking about, and then Kim can give us one thing I was thinking about was, I think today is Seamus Haney's birthday. Do I have that right? Yes, I'm getting some nods. Maybe Irish Studies students. And I was thinking about his collection, the Hall Lantern, and like the title poem in that collection. When the question is, he's retelling the myth of Diogenes, where the lantern is held up to each person and asked, if you had done what you were called to do. And the whole collection for Seamus Haney was about really a moral examination of himself and his poetry, and whether he did the right thing by not explicitly taking a stand in the conflict, which he never did. Instead, he was really a peacemaker, and that was really a radical position to take as a Catholic in Northern Ireland. Now, what he did do was, when he was awarded a prize as a poet of the United Kingdom, he did not accept that prize, right? So he never stood on the sidelines, as it were. But what he did was, he was, like Carolyn Forche said, he was a poet of witness. That's what he did, is he witnessed. And I think that's really important, and we don't often value that position as much as we should.
Okay, now it's working. Right. So I just wanted to say first, thank you all for reading. As someone else said before, there's a really great variety of pieces this evening. So I noticed, in one way or another, I think everyone's poems kind of had an undercurrent theme of spirituality, both directly and indirectly. And I think for me, when I'm writing poetry, this is a working definition that I have because I'm constantly rethinking about what writing poetry means to me. To me, it's entering the crossroads between the mundane and the profane and the divine. And I think it's a lot of poetry is in one way or another in conversation with those three elements. And I was curious for whoever wants to answer, just an open-ended question. In what ways does poetry, enhance or make your understanding of spirituality more complex? Whether that's in your own personal life or just the idea of spirituality as a concept. So yeah, that's.
I'll start really quick. I love that question. I think it's a wonderful question. The only way I'm going to answer it is Charles Peguy, who was a French poet working at the turn of the century. He wrote essays, all kinds of other genres, and then it was only after he had a sort of spiritual experience that he started to write poetry, but now he's known for his poetry, not his other writings. And he had an interesting answer to this question, which was that because poets work with not just metaphors, but analogies, that there's a certain thing that an analogy does. It illuminates this relationship is like that relationship. So it's not just a metaphor, not just this thing's like this thing, but this relationship between these two people is like this political struggle, right? And he really believed that that was the way that God gives himself to us most profoundly in our knowledge. So I think about that a lot. I think that it's not as if writing poetry is a prayer or something like that, but I do think it has an accuracy that's hard to get out with other kinds of language about spiritual things or questions about death or things like that.
Again, it's such a wonderful question. You know, I think for me the question of spirituality is connected with what Allison was saying about paradox. And somehow when you're in the world of poetry, you're always in the business of trying to get words to press out meanings that maybe you're not even in control of. Something is speaking through you. You know, you're sort of, I think it was the great spiritual composer John Tavener who said, I'm not trying to find my voice, I'm trying to find the voice. The voice of peace. So to me it's connected with paradox and embracing paradox, which I think unites spirituality and poetry for me. And also something to do with giving yourself up to something that's bigger than you. You know, I always know that the poem knows things that I don't. The poem is wiser than the poet. You know, if it's successful, right? If it's not a thesis poem, which is sort of dead in the water, but the poem just has ramifications beyond anything I could consciously put in there, and to me that gives it a spiritual dimension with a small s.
And it's smart that that comes from the biggest formalist of all of us, because no, really, I think that writing form often is that kind of submission. You know, the Librarian, for example, a form of Hebrew prayer. There's a way in which you sort of say, I trust this template, this existing format, and you know, to lead me somewhere. I also would just piggyback on the paradox point, which obviously I like, to say Keats's negative capability, I think, is part of this. Like, faith is the most muscular stillness that we have, right? It requires so much effort, in a way, to do nothing, like to be still and sort of trust. And I think poetry is really similar in that way, because there's a kind of uncertainty that is the wisdom, always. It's different than balance, different than like the ... of like a kind of minor key resolution. It is a kind of, I think, like glorious submission and trust. And so to me, they're very aligned. I will say our former colleague, Paul Mariani, wrote a lot about this. And I know there's like a God pod, a quote unquote podcast where he's talking about this, so just shout out to that.
I also think that the attention that is required in poetry is sort of akin to a sacramental worldview. I'm not Catholic, but that has really resonated with me. The sort of, the sense of sacredness that can arise out of just paying close attention and sort of getting out of yourself. And apprehending the world. And you use the word complexity. I think the more you're still and silent and watchful, the more complexity reveals itself and inspires, gratitude and awe. So, I think there's a real chord that forms a harmony between the act of writing poetry and a kind of spiritual state.
For me personally, because I write quite a bit about Jewish themes, I find that if religious dialogue is possible, if it's not hollow rhetoric, if it is an honest conversation among religious communities, not what's better and what's worse, but what's different, I find that for me poetry has worked. Would it be too much to share a short poem which is based on an encounter with two Muslim men in Italy? Yes. So it's quite close to what happened. It's called Wine Tasting in Winter. At a wine tasting outside San Gimignano, I met a Saudi aristocrat with perfectly chiseled fingers. His noble face was stuck half the distance between Rabbi Marx's and Rabbi Freud's, but swarthier. Together, we stood on a grassy terrace overlooking 14 terracotta towers, a sloping vineyard, and a mound of silver olive trees. I said the world had gone mad, and he understood I didn't mean it to be about the war, but only about the summer sun of Tuscany on that February afternoon. He was sipping Chianti with a faint peppery nose. I was wearing a dark blue kippah with a white trim. The Saudi said he and his friend were driving to Milan for a soccer game, and I said they were so lucky. Come with us, he offered. We have 2 extra tickets. I was tempted to say, thank you, Achi, but I held back. He looked away and tugged at his smoldering beard as I retreated and returned to my table, my wife and younger daughter, and my unfinished crostata made of flour, sugar, butter, and blood orange. And I honestly would not have said it in any other way, I swear.
Time for one more question.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to everybody for your poetry and for speaking with us at the end. Everything was just a pleasure. Thank you so much. But I also want to say that the poem that really resonated in my soul was the one about the memory and imagination. It's probably this time in my life now that I have a lot of time, excuse my redundance, time, to think about the past, and I have to think about the memories. So, and it's really sometimes difficult to say whether it is imagination or memory. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Everyone up here knows there's no bigger compliment or honor, so thank you.
Please join me one last time in thanking all of our poets.
Introduce our fellow because we will do this again. I think there's a good enough spirit. We could do this again tomorrow night. Okay? I appreciate your question in the middle there, where you're speaking about this is really for our students here, right? It's writing from experiences, but also writing against writing with writing. I think we heard a lot of those resonances, and this is where your next book, right, is on unheard melodies and apophatic poetics. Right? And then literary reading. So literary reading, you're an Eric, of course, you know it yourself, right? So psychodreams, we hear a lot about things tonight. So we'll have you read next time. Okay. We will, let's continue reading. We actually have some books downstairs, all right? So I hope a couple of you might want to pick up a book or two. Maybe somebody will take a pen